Let's get going with chapter 27, Traitor's Gate. All along the battlements of the Tower of London, Alfred could make out members of the fearsome royal guard. They had their laser guns pointed at the river. As the royal barge approached the gate, it was raised. Creak. Like so many traitors before him down the centuries, this was the way the boy was to begin his imprisonment in the tower. With his hands and feet still in chains, he was taken off the barge, then was bustled down a series of stone walkways until he reached the prison block. Once inside, what hit Alfred first was the stench. It was medieval. Then the noise, constant cries of pain. Help! Please! Ah! The Tower of London was the worst place that Alfred could possibly imagine. Prisoners were crammed into tiny cells, as many as a dozen in each dark, damp little space, and treated worse than animals in a zoo. The prisoners' faces were blackened with dirt and hollow with hunger. They were dressed in rags, with no shoes on their feet. When the boy was marched past the cells, some called out, "Who's that boy? Is it Prince Alfred? What's he doing here?" One toothless old lady laughed and laughed and laughed in a way that made you think she must be mad. A boy held out his hands to beg. "Please, please," he said. Alfred wasn't sure exactly what he was begging for. Mercy, he supposed. Not that he could give it. The prince was one of them now, a prisoner too. He continued past his fellow inmates. Was that old man in chains once commander of the British Army? One night he had vanished from the palace. Was the man with a long grey beard the old chief of police? He'd not been seen in decades. Was that Britain's last Prime Minister, shivering under a dirty old blanket? She had been arrested just before Alfred was born. The Tower of London must have housed 100 or more of these so-called traitors. The prince was desperate to catch sight of his mother. Was she even still alive? As Alfred was dragged along the row of cells, he turned to the guard and said, "I am your prince, and I demand to see the Queen." But the guards just ignored him. Instead, they tightened their grip on the prince's arms. "Ow!" and continued marching him to his cell. Once there, the guards hurled the boy inside. Thud! Oof! The chains around his arms and legs were unlocked, and the door was bolted behind him. Clunk! Alfred ran to the rusty iron bars on the door of his cell and shouted at the guards, "You can't just leave me here to rot!" But they'd had. The prison cell hadn't changed much since the Tower of London had been built in the 11th century. The walls were dark stone, hay was scattered across the floor, and in the corner crouched a little wooden bucket. Alfred presumed this was to do his business in. Being born a prince, Alfred had been sure he would be able to go through his life without ever having to do his business in a bucket. But it turns out that he was wrong. While Alfred felt that brief sense of bliss that comes over with finally having had a wee, he could hear a tapping on the ceiling. Tap, tap, tap. At first, the boy was irritated. This was really putting him off having his wee. As soon as he'd finished, he stood so still that he stood still so he could listen. Tap, tap, tap. 3 in a row. The same rhythm as before. Tap, tap, tap. Alfred wanted to tap back, but even on his tiptoes he wasn't tall enough to reach the ceiling. If only he hadn't filled that bucket with pee, he could stand on it. Tap, tap, tap. There it was again. Oh, never mind, thought the boy. There was a tiny hole in the corner of the cell, down which he carefully poured the yellow liquid. Trickle. "Oi! came a deep voice from down below. "You dirty blighter!" "Sorry," he called back. He'd only been in the Tower of London for 5 minutes, and he'd already upset one of the other prisoners by pouring his wee on his head. Next, Alfred overturned the bucket and stood on it. His hand just reached the ceiling. He clenched his fist and tapped back. Tap, tap, tap. Then, from above, there were another 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. Alfred began to feel a little silly. What on earth was the point in all this tapping? Suddenly he heard scraping from above. Whoever was up there was trying to scratch a hole. Alfred jumped down off the bucket and on his hands and knees searched the floor of his cell. He was looking for anything sharp that he could use to dig from his side. Nothing. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that one of the stones in the wall was jutting out. Using the bucket, he smashed down on it, chipping a bit off. Then Alfred climbed back on the bucket and began scraping away at the ceiling. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Outside, he could hear bootsteps approaching. Stomp, stomp, stomp. A royal guard was on patrol. Alfred leapt down and pretended to be going to the toilet by sitting on the bucket. When a guard peered round the metal bars, the boy called back, "Do you mind? I used to be a prince, you know." The guard shook his head and moved off. Immediately, Alfred got back to work. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Eventually, grit fell down onto his face as the hole was broken through. Alfred put his eye up to it. An eye stared back. At first he was startled, until he realised he knew that eye better than his own. It was his mother's. Chapter 28. Sickness of the Mind. "Lionheart?" asked the voice from above. Alfred wanted to be strong, but it was impossible. Immediately he burst into tears. "Shush, shush, shush, shush," shushed the Queen through the hole in the ceiling. "The guards will hear you." "I can't help it," snorted Alfred. "Don't be sad," she whispered. "I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm happy." "Happy?" "Happy to see you." "Now you're going to make me cry," replied the boy's mother. "Here." The Queen pushed a lace handkerchief through the hole. Alfred took it and dried his eyes. Then he blew his nose. He studied the handkerchief for a moment and read the letters sewn into one corner. V.R. Victoria Regina. That's Queen Victoria. So this handkerchief is hundreds of years old. Yes, I shouldn't really be letting you snot into it, if I'm honest. Sorry. Do you want it back? That's awfully kind of you, dear, but no. What should I do with it? Just pop it up your sleeve. The boy did as he was told and pushed it into the sleeve of his pyjamas. The handkerchief felt all soggy next to his skin, and for a moment he wondered why grown-ups would ever choose to do that. "Mama, how I wish I could have one of your special cuddles right now." "And how I wish I could give you a special cuddle. I would give all my past and all my future to hold you in my arms right now." "You're going to make me cry again," he sniffed. "Alfred, let's have a finger cuddle." "A finger cuddle?" "Yes, here you go." With that, the Queen poked her finger down through the hole. Alfred stretched high on the bucket and poked his finger up, and they touched. It felt strange and strangely comforting all at once. "Why have you been sent here?" asked the Queen. "Father sent me." "No! How could he do that to his own son?" "He's not well, Mama." "You're right. There is an awful sickness in his mind. He would tell me about these terrifying nightmares, night after night after night. Nightmares about some kind of fiery monster. "They're not nightmares, Mama," replied Alfred. "They're real." "What on earth do you mean?" "You're not going to believe me, but I saw something in the palace during the night. Something truly horrifying." "What?" "The king was there." "What was he doing?" "It looked like he was sleepwalking." "Sleepwalking?" "Yes, into this, well, I can't say exactly. Ritual?" "A ritual? Was it just your father?" "No, the Lord Protector was there." "Of course! I should have guessed he would be behind this," exclaimed Mother. "Yes, he was using some dark arts, the Lord Protector was. He was what?" The boy felt strange saying it, but he knew what he had seen. He was conjuring a creature to life. "What kind of creature?" "A creature made of fire. A griffin." "A griffin?" pondered his mother. "The symbol of divine power dating back thousands of years. Are you sure you weren't just reading one of your old books and then having a nightmare?" "No," replied Alfred calmly. "This was real." "Then this griffin must give the Lord Protector power over the king. The visions must have scared him half to death. The poor, poor man. This isn't just a vision, Mama, and if we don't stop it, this beast will kill us all." We'll leave it there for today. Chapter 29 next time. Bye.